Welcome back. Our next presenter is John Helmus. John is a security engineer and adjunct professor and also an author of a new book that is upcoming related to AWS security. His talk today is Ghost in the Clouds, Bypassing AWS Policies. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for supporting the Red Team Village and supporting Grey Hat. The floor is yours.
My name's John Helmus, and I'm glad to be here at the Red Team Village at Grey Hat 2020. Today, I'm going to talk about AWS, AWS services, and how we can bypass some of the policies that are commonly found in some of these services. So this is going to be a talk that kind of concludes a lot of research that I've done for a book that's coming out in December. So glad you're here. Sit back, relax, hang out with me in the Discord, and let's get going. So, the agenda for today. Well, of course, we have to talk about who I am, right? It wouldn't be a slide deck without talking about who I am, right? So, we're going to talk a little bit about me. Then we're going to talk about AWS. We're going to talk about some of the services that we commonly see in AWS. We're going to talk about how we pen test AWS. And then we're going to talk about policies, right? So we're kind of seeing the trickle effect here in AWS. Then we're going to talk about how we bypass some of these policies. We're going to see a lot of cool screenshots that are derived from a lot of different research. And then we're going to actually do a demo towards the end of the presentation. So I actually got my Kali machine fired up here. We're all good to go. And then at the end, before we go into the Q&A, I am going to talk about a book being released on December 9th. I actually have a promo code for everyone who's in attendance today, so stick around to the end to get a discount on the book if you're interested in that, as well as I'm going to do a sign up for a free signed book raffle. So, if you want a free book, or well, the potential to get a free book anyways, or at least a discount code that you will for sure get, stick around for the end of the talk. So, who am I? Well, my name's John Helmus. I live up here in Seattle, Washington. In the community, sometimes people commonly know me as Moosey. Currently, I work at Nordstrom as a penetration test engineer, or in this case, I'm currently a team lead. I also am an adjunct professor and teach online courses at City University of Seattle and National University. At CityU, I teach various bachelor and master level courses. And at National University, I actually have done some content development for them and currently teach master level ethical hacking, pen testing, and red teaming courses. I'm also an author now. My book, AWS Penetration Testing, is being published by PAC towards the end of the year. And then some of you might actually recognize me from DEF CON. I presented the student roadmap to becoming a penetration tester. I presented this talk a couple times since DEF CON. But if you were at DEF CON, that's where you may recognize me from. I'm also a PhD student at the Dakota State University. I'm getting a PhD of cyber operations. Going to be doing that for at least the next few years. I currently do hold a master's in cybersecurity with a focus in ethical hacking and pen testing from National University. So I'm really fortunate there that I was able to actually be an alumni of the program and then help revamp the program a few years later, even after graduating, as well as teach it. And then out of all the certifications I have, the highest, shiniest one that I got is the OSCP. So I'm going to move my head around here a little bit, as you can see, so that I don't take up too much space of the slides. So we're going to talk about AWS. So what is AWS? All right, so it's a cloud service provider that's based here out of Seattle, Washington. Seattle, Washington is becoming kind of like Cloud City metaphorically and literally, right? With all the clouds and rain that we have up here, as well as all the big tech providers are up here now. AWS, Azure and Microsoft have been here, since they were founded. Microsoft, right? And then Azure has come up. And then Google and GCP are up here. So the big cloud giants are here. However, AWS makes up most of the market, right? So 60% of the market within cloud is actually pretty much owned by AWS. And what that means is that, out of all the cloud that, organizations are buying, 60% of them are going to AWS. And even a lot of the times companies double down on different services. So what that means is that a company will buy AWS and buy Azure. So you're going to need to have some experience with, at least one of those. And so for this, we're going to be targeting AWS. So 60% of the market means a lot of people use it. So in regards to the way how it's set up, it's a typical infrastructure, has a service model. You can go Google the shared security model that's provided by AWS, and you'll see a lot of, different colors and where things are associated with who, and who would be the customer or AWS. So, after this talk, if you're still a little muddy about it, feel free to ping me in Discord, or I can, put a link in the Discord to guide you to the illustration of the shared security model. But essentially what it breaks down to is that the owner, and the owner being the cloud service provider, takes care of the hardware, takes care of the security that's built into the services, right? Built into the services. That doesn't mean afterthought where we're configuring the services, it's built into the service. Owners take responsibility of that. And then the customers, we would be the customers, we take care of the data and all the configurations that are used to secure that data. So if you've followed the news in recent years, you'll see that a lot of data leaks have been caused by S3 buckets, which we'll talk about later throughout the talk. But that's due from not taking due care to the services that we're supposed to secure. And we, meaning the customers. So some of the services, these are some of the more common ones that we're going to see, right? And for an introductory level, these are the big ones that you want to start to look at. So a lot of services within AWS that allow us to essentially take, everything that we would build on premises and put it in the cloud. And a lot of companies utilize that to execute their business strategies, especially small and medium businesses that may not have the budget to afford all the hardware that you would need for on-premises. They can use a service such as AWS to help bring up their systems. So what are some of the common services, right? We need to know at least some of the common services and their functions and what they're used for. So S3 buckets. S3 buckets, I always like to think of that as like it's a file system in the cloud, right? And think about it as like Windows File Explorer, where you share files back and forth between users, and you can apply security restrictions based off of users, groups, things like that. S3 buckets are pretty much the same thing, right? Only it's in the cloud. So it can't be any more simple than that. Lambda is essentially, think about that as like kind of like a function in the cloud, where you write functions in Lambda that are able to execute things on demand, or at when they're triggered, they can from an event and things like that, right? So Lambda is really at the dependent of the user and the customer and how they set everything up. So that's one of the big security issues commonly found in AWS environments is Lambda, because it's completely dependent on how we write the code that's put into the Lambda function. EC2 acts as has a piece of virtual hardware. Think about VirtualBox, VMware, things like that. EC2 is essentially that, where you load up an operating system onto it, and then it gets spun up into the cloud. And then it's given an internal and an external. If you request or want an external IP, it'll give you an external IP that can be accessed on the internet, and then it allows you to access that operating system. RDS, relational databases. Think about that as like a SQL database in the cloud, where you can have things running. It can be running on the back end to like a web server that you have running, or something like that. A common configuration is to set up a web server on an EC2 instance and then have the RDS work as the background. Or, I'm sorry, the back end, not background. It works in the background. So now that we know some services and we know at least enough about AWS, let's talk about how we pen test AWS. And this is something that I've spent a lot of time this year looking at and working on to really make a cohesive statement in how you can effectively and efficiently pen test AWS, because you cannot take a normal white box or black box or gray box approach. You can't do that. It's not going to work. If anything, the most usable and effective approach would be a white box test. However, even there, it can be a little different. So what we need to do is we need to focus on functional vulnerabilities when we're pen testing AWS. And what I mean by that is we need to look at the issues that we are incorporating into AWS and into the services that we're using, or in this case, our customers are using, if you're an external pen tester. Why? Because we're the ones developing policies, we're developing those Lambda functions, we're doing all of that to secure the services to, fit our needs so that we can use them to drive our business goals, or for our customers to drive their business goals, right? And make an impact for their organization that positively pushes them forward in the market. However, we make mistakes because we're what? Humans. So we're going to be testing those processes, common issues, and misconfigurations that we find in services and in an organization, right? So what we need to do is look at this from an insider point of view. And for those of you that are, familiar with pen testing and do it for a living, you understand what the insider threat point of view means. And what that means is that we assume post-compromise. However, with AWS pen testing, you don't necessarily need to assume post-compromise, because when you're doing that, it makes some different assumptions that AWS pen testing does not assume. You assume that there's, someone who has access that already has admin level access, or, whatever user level access, and then you start hacking everything, right? You're not going to do that with AWS pen testing entirely. You can, but it's still not going to be effective and efficient if you only focus on that. So what we really want to do is look at this as a non-traditional pen test methodology and really create it into its own. And we're going to, not really talk too much more about this after this. However, I will put the plug in here, of course, that if you want to find out more about that, sign up for the raffle at the end of this talk, or, go buy the book. It's 300 pages full of this stuff that's going to talk about AWS pen testing and how you can effectively execute an AWS pen test for your organization or for a customer organization. Just know that when you're pen testing AWS, that you want to think about it as looking at it as like a quality assurance engineer, but with a threat adversarial mindset. So to conclude that kind of portion, what I always like to say is that, AWS pen testing plus white box pen testing equals functional testing, right? Or white box testing plus functional testing equals AWS pen testing. And again, if you want to find out more about that, please, buy the book. Like I said, I'm going to have a discount code here at the end that'll give you a nice little discount on buying it for the ebook or the physical copy, and really, dive into what it is that you need to do in order to create an effective AWS pen testing methodology that's going to help you, your organization, and the customers that you work with. Now, enough about my book, enough about AWS pen testing. Let's really talk about the cool stuff and how we're going to actually bypass some of these policies within AWS. So first we need to know the fundamentals about policies. So policies are created by us, the customers, the humans. They're not created by AWS. They're not going to sit there and create policies that fit your organization, because only you know your organization, or your customers know their organizations, and hopefully you know your customers' organizations. So these policies are created by humans, which means what? They have human errors, right? So when we look at these policies, and we're going to look at a few throughout this talk here in a little bit, we're going to see some screenshots of some things, and then also in the demo, where you're going to see that it's pretty self-explanatory. Policies are restricted and granted by two things: users and groups, typically, right? More commonly. And so what that means is that, user ABC might be denied something, but user DEF will be allowed something, or group ABC might be allowed something, and XYZ might be disallowed something. So, to think about it simply, think about it with like a Windows file system where you set up a file and you allow either users or a group to access it, or, AD when you create user groups and things like that. It's the same thing there. So bypassing these, right? So typically caused by issues such as overly permissive policies. So overly permissive policies are not, isolated incidents only to AWS. For anyone who pen tests for a living, you understand that over permissive policies tend to allow us to get access to things that we shouldn't, and allow users to get access to things that they shouldn't. So that's really the more common issue that we see with policies. And the reason why we see that, there's a lot of reasons, which we'll talk about in a second. But know that when you're looking at the policies, if there's anything that you are allowed to write to that you shouldn't, then it's not right. So I always like to say, if you can write, it ain't right. So overly permissive policies allow admin to edit access to objects. So objects can be services, or files, or anything within a service, such as like S3, RDS, things like that, or Lambda. So the admins will set up a policy that allows them to configure an S3 bucket so that they can grab files, and then when user Timmy and Jimmy get added to the organization of 10 people, and now they got 12 people, they can say, okay, Timmy and Jimmy are added, and they write to the bucket policy, and now Timmy and Jimmy are added. Now the issue here is that typically, very commonly, the admin will allow anyone to write to that, right? Because they'll just set it up to where they allow anyone to write to the policy, and that's just kind of how it goes, which is not good, obviously, right? And you can kind of like snowball effect that and scale it into this really, really scary peak, where imagine when it's not just 12 users, it's 100 users or 1,000 users. And they're not using like something like single sign-on. They're just using an access key and a secret key and things like that. It can really start to become cumbersome and pretty scary. So common issues allow to put policies where policies can be amended. So when I mentioned, you can write to the policy, essentially you can amend it and you can allow it to do whatever you want it to do. And we're going to check that out in the demo here in a bit. But just know, again, if you can write, it's probably not right. So I'm going to get a drink of water here. And now I'm going to keep talking. So how do users get access to things, or how are AWS accounts compromised? Typically it's through initial key access. So keys are left out in the open that lead to cloud compromise. So you'll see things in GitHub, Gist, or Gist, whatever you want to call it, right? You get socially engineered through a phishing link, things like that. LFI, RFI, where you're able to retrieve keys through vulnerable web servers or web apps. And what that'll allow you is to get keys that allow you access into the internal system. So that's why we want to make sure that we focus on functional testing, because when we're doing functional testing, we're actually looking at the issues internally, right? So we already assume the keys have been compromised. That's why when we do AWS pen testing, we want to already have the keys or have some kind of access. So here I went ahead and pulled two users. As you can see, the user Musi has admin privileges. So if you look at groups, it says admin. And then when you look at the user Gray Hat, they have it looks like S3 kind of stuff where they can access S3 buckets, right? So imagine being able to get keys to Gray Hat, which I actually was running this command off of the Gray Hat user, and I was able to discover the admin user. So what if I was, an attacker, I would want to see how I could get to the user Musi. And there's a lot of different privilege escalation techniques we could use, or we could, try to go actually locally find that user and target them. You can use your imagination, but this is a, pretty typical way of how initial access is compromised and gained. So now we're going to start to look at some different things. So we looked at how keys are compromised, how we get initial access, right? So now let's actually start to talk about some of these policies that we've talked about, right? So to kind of summarize before we get into the policies, we've talked about, AWS, the services. We've also talked about common misconfigurations, as well as how, an attacker or a pen tester will get access or needs access to do testing. So obviously, by the way, a threat is not going to just test. They're going to be doing a lot more worse than that, right? So public bucket blocks, right? Never good. If you go and rummage the internet for anything that talks about AWS leaks, a lot of times it's going to come through a public bucket. Allows anyone access to the resources on that bucket. Remember, a bucket's just like a file in the cloud, right? And so if it can be accessed on the internet, what that means is that anyone on the internet can go into that file, or that folder rather. So sensitive data stored in public buckets by mistake, or is it? So when you think about it, the scenarios that I always like to say when you find a public bucket is saying, okay, the admin put a public bucket out there for, non-sensitive data to get put in. However, someone who is not so tech savvy may have accidentally put some kind of like sensitive data in it because they needed to get it into a file repo really quick, and they just put it in there by accident, realized they put it in there by accident, but didn't know how to delete it, and they went to the next thing, right? And didn't think anything about it. So when we look at this policy and you think about the things that you could store in it, and you can use your imagination based off what I just said, you can look at the policy itself and realize that you can see all these things set to false. What that means is that there's no access control on this, and that we can pull anything from the bucket, including sensitive data, if it accidentally gets stored in there, which is obviously a big no-no. So when you're going out there and you're doing your AWS pen testing, and you're looking at buckets within an organization, one of the first things that you want to do is look for anything that has a public access block, right? And so you can see the command here highlighted in yellow. That's going to pull information off of a target bucket. In this case, we're doing it off of Gray Hat Public, which for the scenario is the bucket that we had. So to illustrate, too, that this isn't just something in a controlled environment, right? Because that was just a bucket that I spun up really quick and attached an open policy to. I went ahead and attached some screenshots from a tool called Gray Hat Warfare. And Gray Hat Warfare is a S3 bucket tool on the web, and I'll make sure to put that in the Discord for everyone, where you can actually go on the in here and just, it's like a query engine, as you can see here, where you type in a keyword, you type in some file extensions, and that's it, and you click search. So here, all I wanted to do was look for public buckets on the internet without like any kind of target organization. Just look for public buckets that had the keyword passwords and the extension was txt. So essentially, I'm just looking for password files that are stored on an open bucket. Well, I blanked out the full file path or the full Amazon resource name to the actual file, but as you can see, this is 4 buckets, and I can tell you when I did that search, I got a lot of buckets, right? And you have to kind of go through and see if there's something there or if there isn't. And if you do find something, make sure that you report it. Which I actually found something and I immediately reported it, so that's good. Hopefully that gets fixed. But what I wanted to mention is that, this doesn't just happen in controlled environments. You can go on tools like Gray Hat Warfare or just do a public bucket query on your own, and you'll be able to find a lot of stuff just open to the internet that has sensitive data in it. And in this case, I only showed four buckets, but when I looked it up, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of buckets that fit this description. So it's a pretty common issue. So some more policies. So remember how I said if you can write, it ain't right, right? If you can't, or if you can write, it ain't right. So I did blank out some things here, and I actually pulled, I was having some trouble writing my own policies to fit this. So, but I pulled some screenshots from some labs that I had done, and wanted to illustrate some common issues, right? So the issue here is that, as we can see, there's an ID and a display name. The display name is blanked out because that's the user. However, as you can see, it says permission to write ACP, so that's writing to the access control policy. Remember, if you can write, it ain't right. So essentially what this is saying is that this user can write to the access control policy and allow other users. So guess what? Now that user writes to the access control policy and allows full control. So they went from being able to have some kind of restricted access based on the ACL to now having full control. So again, going back to the last screenshot, first they could only write. Now they have full control and can do whatever they want. They could knock off other users. They could deny access and essentially create a denial of service to the resource just because they were able to write. So when you go out there and you do your AWS pen testing and things like that, make sure that you're pulling ACLs as well, because that's going to show you based on the users of what they have access to. All right, so another common policy, and this one in my mind seems silly. However, we do see it. So this is actually a very, very overly permissive policy attached to Lambda. So remember, Lambda is, code in the cloud, allows you to write and execute functions that allow you to do a lot of different things, basically whatever you want them to do. So what this is saying is that it says all actions by all resources. Essentially what that says is that it can do anything. It can write, read, execute, whatever on all resources within that environment connected to that Lambda function. Now, you might be thinking that sounds like absurd. Why would you have that? Because it's easier when you're developing Lambda functions to just allow them to do whatever they need to and not have to worry about all the security, because once you start implementing security into them, it makes configuring them a lot more difficult for engineers and administrators. So this is actually a very common issue that you will come across where you see where all actions can be performed, as well as you notice here, this is more directed towards a Lambda function where the Lambda function is allowed to do whatever it wants to. And so I think, what was it, a couple weeks ago from recording this, I did a workshop at ShellCon where I actually showed the attendees how you could get a reverse shell based off of an overly permissive Lambda function. I also have a write-up of how you could do it from a functional testing standpoint. I'll make sure to put that link in the Discord. But know that if you go and look at that walkthrough, that all derives from weak policies built around Lambda functions. And it's not just with Lambda functions, right? We've seen that it's with S3 buckets, and then just know that it's not with even just those two services. It's with any service that you can configure a policy and an access control list to. And now, I'm going to take another sip of water. So now, we're looking at a policy that we're actually going to do a demo on. So this is going to be pretty cool. So let's really look at this. So this is a policy that we pulled from a target bucket. We'll say that we were doing a pen test on a target environment. We discovered a bucket, and so we pulled the policy off of that bucket. if you look at this policy, and we'll highlight some things in the next screenshots, just take a second to look at it. Notice the actions, what it allows, what it doesn't allow, things like that. All right, so really take a second. Wish I could cue some Jeopardy music or something like that. All right, hopefully you caught that. All right, so notice what we got highlighted in yellow. It says action S3 get object deny. So what that means is that we can't get the object, right? The object is that file. Notice how it says gray hat passwords / passwords.txt. We can't get that passwords.txt, all right? And we want that passwords.txt because we want to prove that we're able to exfiltrate data, right? That's the big cool thing when in pen testing, you know, besides getting a reverse shell or an RC, if you can exfiltrate data, that's, you know, always a win for the pen test team, not such a win for the target organization, right? So really remember that, because we're going to look at that again in the lab, or the demo, rather. And then look at the action that is allowed. We can get the bucket policy, and we can put the bucket policy. So what that means is, because we were able to get the bucket policy, that's why we can see what we see here on the screen. But we can put a bucket policy. So really think about that. In an admin standpoint, that sounds pretty reasonable, and it sounds normal, saying, oh yeah, I gotta get the bucket policy so I can read it, and so I need to know if I can add, you know, user Timmy and Jimmy, and then I'll put a new bucket policy that has them on it. That's cool, great, awesome. However, remember how we had the gray hat user, and then there was the Moosey user? Imagine being able to escalate privileges to that Moosey user, or being able to discover that Moosey user that, you know, might not even be affiliated with this account, but yet they could actually, you know, take over this bucket policy. So remember that when we're doing the demo here in a second, but just know that this is actually a common thing that you would see in an AWS environment, and it's not good. And we'll see here in a second. So I wrote this cool little description in PowerPoint. It's not my best work, but it'll do. So I wanted to go through the steps of how we would bypass the policy that we just saw screenshots for. So an attacker would attempt to grab objects from the bucket, right? The bucket policy doesn't allow you to get an object, but it does allow you to put that policy. So remember, we're trying to get the object, which is the password.txt file, but we can't get it. So let's see if we can put a policy. Okay, so an attacker would modify and upload a new bucket policy with the ARN of the target bucket. The ARN is the Amazon resource name, which we'll show you here again a second in the demo. And then the attacker puts a new policy on the bucket, right? So we the attacker, or the attacker, would take that bucket policy, amend it, and then put a new one on there, and the attacker is able to exfiltrate data from the bucket. And now it's time for a demo. So I'm going to move my screen over here. And now that we're over here with my head adjusted, now we're actually going to go in and we're going to do the demo. Demo time. Sorry, had to do that. All right. So you should see my Kali machine here. So let's go ahead and we're going to assume that we have access to the environment, right? Because we're looking at and doing a functional test. And let's go ahead and list out some of the S3 buckets that we got. All right, so we can see that we have the gray hat public bucket, and then we have the gray hat passwords. So we looked at the gray hat public bucket in the slides. That showed us that, you know, anyone on the internet can access that bucket. It's no bueno. So we're not going to really worry about that in this demo. Just know that that was the one that where we can, you know, essentially, if you wanted to scale it out, you could think about it where you go onto the gray hat warfare tool and start looking at public buckets that you could use for a target organization or rummaging the internet. So what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be targeting this one, the gray hat passwords bucket. So let's go ahead and we're going to call the bucket policy for that bucket. And notice how we get this jumble of stuff. It's great. It's awesome. It actually tells us what we need to do, but it's not very readable. So let's output it a little better. We use that with output text, and then I like to use the JSON tool or the JSON tool module built within Python. Is it JSON tool? Oops, not tool. And there we go. We got a better bucket policy here. So as we can see, we have the gray hat passwords.txt, or well, the passwords.txt file here, right? But we can't get it. Or so the policy says. However, of course, we're pen testers, so we want to check and see if we can get it anyways. So let's go ahead and see if we can get that. So first thing first is we want to call the bucket. Now we see the file stored inside the bucket. And now let's see if we can actually copy that. So we're going to go back, copy that file. And I did something wrong. What did I do? I think I did it right. Didn't I? Oh, I missed. I need to try to store it into my local machine, and we don't get that. Notice how we get the forbidden. Right? So essentially what we did is we tried to copy this file right here. Passwords.txt from this bucket, the gray hat passwords. Tried to put it into our local file directory right here, but we weren't able to do it. Why? Remember, we're denied access to that resource. So let's go ahead and let's pull that bucket policy one more time. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do a simple copy of the bucket policy. So now you can open up any kind of like text editor that you want to use. I like gedit and VI. I'm going to use gedit for this, just because it's nice and colorful and it's easy to read. All right. So let me see if I can. So now, if you see the policy here that we've put, notice how we've just copied the policy that we were able to pull from the bucket, right? Because we were able to get the bucket policy. It's the same thing, only notice here how it says deny. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to switch deny to allow. And what that's going to do is, essentially, in theory, it should allow us access to passwords.txt. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to save that. And now let's clear this out so we don't have so much mess on the screen. Let's go ahead and reevaluate this, pull the bucket policy again. And still says deny. And I'm recording this late at night, so my head is a little fuzzy. We actually need to do one more thing. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to put the bucket policy. All right, so we have to put the bucket policy from our local machine. So how we're going to do that is we're going to go AWS S3 API, and then we're going to put the bucket policy. Right, and now we need to annotate the policy that we're going to be doing. So we're going to go policy root gray hat, and then policy.json, right? Because that's the policy that we made. And now we're going to be putting it on the bucket gray hat passwords. Okay, so essentially what we're doing is we're putting the bucket policy, and then we're calling this policy. So we're calling this from our local machine, and we're putting it on this bucket. And since we didn't get any kind of error or anything, that means that we should be able to get the object, right? We should have been able to rewrite to the bucket policy, or rewritten the bucket policy rather. So to do that, let's go ahead and just verify that we're able to get or change the bucket policy. So now we're going to go ahead and pull the bucket policy again, and notice how now it says allow. So pretty cool. So now we should be able to get this in theory. So now what we have to do in order to get it is we just go back. We're going to go back to that other command and see if we can get it. And notice how we were able to actually download it. We cat out the passwords. And don't let anyone at Gray Hat see these passwords. Admin, seriously? So that's essentially in a manual kind of sense of how we could actually pull the policy. There's a lot of other different techniques that you can use. You can write a script to pull this if you want. I think I actually I have this other tab open where I've written a Python script to where if we wanted to try to pull it, we could. So it shows the existing buckets. We want to see if we can do this one. So what bucket would you like to check? Please choose from the list above. We're going to use Gray Hat passwords. It's going to give us this stuff. I'm still trying to figure it out, see if you can pull it a certain way to make it in the more fancier output way. But still the same thing. It says that we're able to get the object and able to put the bucket policy and get the bucket policy. So does the bucket allow you to put a new bucket policy? We would type yes. And would you like to steal the objects from the bucket? Yes. So it's going to list out the buckets that are, the files that we want to steal. So we'll go ahead and steal these. And would you like to upload a proof.txt to show that, hey, we were there? Sure. And it says that, yes, okay, we won't upload anything. That might just be an error. And now we should be able to, if we go back, we can list this out. And it didn't pull it. Or I'm sorry, it didn't put the proof.txt. So need to make a couple edits there. But essentially, in the long run, what we were able to do was we were able to pull that bucket policy, put a new bucket policy, and get that password.txt. So that's the demo. Now let's go back into the slides. So what did we learn? Bad policies equal a bad time. Ensure that your policies are not overly permissive. So when you're out there, hacking the cloud, so to speak, make sure that you're looking for these weak policies, these policies that are going to allow you to read and write. Again, the key word is write to any kind of service and the policies within that service. So AWS does not ensure your security, you do. So when you're working with your clients, you're working for your organization, and anything in there in between, make sure that you're checking policies regularly. Again, regularly, because remember, the cloud is, you can scale up an entire infrastructure in less than a day. So services will be spun up, instantaneously without anyone being notified. So make sure that you're regularly keeping track of everything that's in the cloud within your organization and that it's being tested and checked. And then, to finish off, I wanted to talk one more time about my book release. So my book, AWS Penetration Testing, it is supposed to be released on December 9th. You can go pre-order it now on Amazon.com and packpub.com. I do have a cool fancy discount code here. So as you can see, it says 20 pen test. If you go and buy this on Amazon, and unfortunately it is only for US only, but if you go and buy it on Amazon and you put in that code, you will be given a discount. I believe it's 20%, hence the 20 pen test. Don't quote me on it, but I believe that's what it is. So it'll save you a few bucks. and you can be on your way to learning how to pen test AWS. I'll also put a link here in the Discord chat that will allow you to sign up in the free sign book raffle. So if you want to sign up for that, go ahead and fill out the information in the link that I provide. And then that's pretty much it, everyone. From here, I'm here for your questions. Looking forward to it. I'm in the Discord, or even hanging out here in the virtual world. Just kidding. So once again, thanks again for coming to my talk. I really hope you enjoyed it. Really hope it is a baseline to help engage you into more constructive and effective AWS pen testing. And I look forward to your questions in the chat, and I appreciate you coming and stopping by my talk.